What precautionary measure did you take, thinking just to be safe, that unexpectedly ended up saving the day later on? 1. I run a reptile and exotic animal rescue in South Texas. We are having very cold weather. I drove out to the rescue to check on everyone one more time even though I'd been out there many times today. The heat had stopped working. We ended up having to move all the reptiles to my house. They would have died tonight. It's crowded as fuck but everyone is alive. The 90-pound tortoise in my living room I'd probably gonna fuck some stuff up. But he's alive. 2. This is the best one in this whole thread. Snuggly warm reptiles? 3. Thank you so much for saving the critters. 4. The 90-pound tortoise in my living room I'd probably gonna fuck. You had me in the first half, not gonna lie. 5. Freudian slip. 6. Happens to the breast of us. 7. Bought a generator 15 years ago because a hurricane was forecast. Drove 3 hours to get it. Didn't lose power that month. Hubby rolled his eyes. 2 months later, the October storm hit, dumped 20 inches of snow, state lost power, we lost power for 13 days. We had the wood stove and the generator, well, some lights, stove and fridge. 8. I remember when that storm hit. We lost power for a similar amount of time and went to stay with our family a state over. My school was still running so I was desperate to get back home. I remember calling the landline every day to see if it went right to voicemail or not as that would tell us if our power was back. 9. I take screenshots of what my managers say in Teams. One manager said one thing. Another tried to say it never happened. I produced the screenshot. 10. No better feeling than producing receipts. 11. Let the record show that you's a lion bitch. 12. That reminded me of when a classmate and I swapped clinical days for my sister's wedding. I emailed my professor and clinical instructor about the swap, and they both replied that it was fine. Then they forgot, and I didn't answer my phone that day because I was up to my ears in last-minute centerpieces. I was notified that it would count as an unexcused absence, which would have required me to repeat that semester. So I forwarded the original acknowledgments of the swap to my professor, clinical instructor, and dean of students. Suddenly it wasn't a problem anymore. 13. What they say in chat? Isn't that saved in the transcript? 14. What do the managers say when I can produce evidence of what was said? They get mad about it, no doubt. Retaliation is common and is expected. You set your own risk. Teams chats can vanish overnight. That's why I screenshot it. 15. Teams chats only go back 90 days at my company. Emails too. It's insane. 16. Legal protection. If a court demands all company chats to prove they're guilty of something, they can just say they were auto-deleted without getting in trouble for destroying evidence. 17. Yep. I produced receipts after a boss decided to be a dick. Cost me a promotion as she set out to destroy me behind the scenes. 18. My organization erases Teams chats after 10 days. It's the stupidest thing to me and I have never received an explanation as to why that policy exists. 19. Randomly went with my friend to buy her new car. Just needed to get out of the house. Convinced her to buy Gap insurance cause it was cheap and I wish I had gotten it for peace of mind. Her car got stolen and instead of being stuck with the loan the insurance paid out after 30 days or whatever, and she got another car. 20. I was buying a flashy sports car and was convinced to get just a little more car than I could afford. I had to borrow against my lock. So I decided to get replacement insurance. Just in case. Not much and I paid off the lock in like 5 months. 3 years later, a tree falls on my car. Turns out, with my replacement insurance, I get the replacement value of a brand new model of my car. In the meantime, I got over my sports car phase. I bought a reasonable car with the money and put about $40,000 in my pocket. Best decision I ever made. 21. Gap insurance saved my butt on my last car accident. 22. Not stopping. About 20 years ago I almost stopped to help a stranded motorist. Saw a highway patrol behind me and knew he would stop. That night on the news I saw that he did stop and a shootout ensued after the officer noticed the ignition wire had been pulled from the distributor. The stranded motorist was an escaped prisoner looking for another car to steal. 23. As horrible as it sounds, I don't think I could stop for anyone that looks like they need help. I'm honestly terrified something would happen to me. 24. My father-in-law was an 18-wheeler truck Driver. He once saw a woman, alone, and in distress with her car on the side of the road and the hood up. He got out to help her. Hidden, on the other side of a car, was a man with a gun, the woman's accomplice. They took my father-in-law's wallet and let him go? He didn't stop to help stranded motorists after that. 25. I've only stopped once and I was with my husband. If I had been alone, first of all I wouldn't have been much help, but I also wouldn't have stopped. It was to help a college-aged looking young woman whose car was stuck in the snow. I knew someone else would probably stop as there were lots of guys in their trucks going around helping people as many people were stuck in the unexpected bad weather. All I could think though is that she would feel more comfortable with me, another woman, approaching her, because if I was alone and immobile on the side of the road, while I would be grateful to anyone who stopped, I would be nervous at least at first of a random man stopping and approaching since I couldn't move. Turns out, on my way up to her car, I heard her say to who sounded like her dad, "Oh, it's a guy and he's with his wife. I'm good." While we, okay mostly him, were shoveling, a group of guys in a landscaping truck pulled up, jumped out, and without a word dug her car out, loaded up and left in about 2 minutes. They were the real MVPs, but I'm glad I could make another girl feel more comfortable in a shitty situation, even if that was my only actual contribution. 26. On multiple occasions my uncle has been held at gunpoint because he stopped to help someone. He still stops. I'm convinced that's going to be in his obituary someday. It's happened enough times he's actually fixed cars for some of the muggers. 27. Shows a hell of a character if your obituary has something like, died the way he lived, being a caring soul to those in need. 28. One time I was hitchhiking and this guy ended up picking me up in a minivan. First thing he said was, "Put your seatbelt on. This car's hot," and being a naive kid I was like, "It's all good, I can just roll down the aisle," and then I noticed the screwdriver in the ignition. Interesting guy. Ended up giving me a ride all the way out of town, dropped me off at a cabin, sold me a stolen TV, 7/10 would hitchhike again. 29. Kidnapping, good ending. 30. My ex got mad at me, a 24-year-old girl at that time, for not stopping to help random people. Like, I will call the sheriff's deputy, but ain't nobody gonna benefit from my immediate help anyway. 31. About 25 years ago, my uncle stopped to help 2 men stranded on the side of the highway. Turns out they weren't stranded. One guy pulls out a gun and demands my uncle's wall. 32. TLDR, my paranoia about a strange guy in a car kept my house from flooding. We had a house fire October 2021 and we were bouncing back and forth between our house and a rental. Christmas Eve was extra cold and our pipes were frozen in our house. 1894, no insulation yet. So we decided to go to the rental for Christmas Eve. My wife and daughter were taking one car and I was taking the other. When I left the house I saw a man sitting in his car across the street messing on his phone. Given the cold weather it seemed odd. When my wife left, the man pulled his car across the street to the spot she just left. This is a one-way street. Since I'm further back, I watch for a bit, but he doesn't do anything, just gets back on his phone. Eventually my wife calls and asks where I am, because she didn't bring her keys for the rental. I drove over and let her in and tell her about the guy. She encourages me to go back and point one of our security cameras his direction just in case. When I get back he's still there, so I go inside. Once I'm inside I hear water running. In the 30 minutes I was gone the water started running again. In the back kitchen where the fire had been, the faucet was still on and was flooding the room. I shut that off and went downstairs to check the cellar under the kitchen for water leakage. In the cellar was a cracked copper pipe spraying water across the room. So, I shut off the water and cleaned up the kitchen before the damage could cause permanent problems. When I left, the guy's car was still there, but he was gone. I think he was meeting a neighbor for Christmas Eve dinner. But, if he hadn't been there, the house would have been flooding for who knows how long. 33. Thought this was a Home Alone reference, aka the Wet Bandits. 34. What was it like living in 1894? Have there been any long-term side effects of the vampirism? 35. Nah. Just more paranoia. I don't trust death, so I haven't done it yet. 36. Not as interesting or as good an example as yours, but I was away from my East Coast home on business on the West Coast and I had asked my girlfriend to come by and check on my place and stay there if she liked. We hadn't been dating long and she still had her own apartment. She came over and discovered a pipe had burst below the second-floor bathroom, and it had wrecked the first-floor ceiling, walls, carpet, and flooded the finished basement 2 feet deep. Had she not come over, because there really was no reason she would have had to, it would have been even worse. 37. Slept with bedroom door open the other day. We almost never do that, and honestly it was because I wanted to be able to hear for some reason. Smelled gas at midnight. Turns out my daughter had turned the stove knob just a touch before going to bed 5 hours earlier. That was a scary one. 38. Had a moment like this many years ago while still living at my parents'. Was going to spend the night at a friend's and just decided I wanted to sleep in my own bed instead. Came home at 1 a.m. to find the kitchen reeked of gas from the stove. Scary to think about what could have happened if I didn't just want to be comfy in my bed that night. 39. Oh man, you would have had a really hard time forgiving yourself for not being home. I am so glad for you that you went home that night. Slightly related, Weird Al lost both his parents to carbon monoxide. I saw him in concert just a few days after it happened. I've seen him quite a few times, and while he's always amazing, that show was by far the best. The poor guy just absolutely poured every ounce of himself into that performance. I suspect it was a coping mechanism to distract himself from the unbelievable tragedy. I felt very conflicted about enjoying it. 40. In Maryland like 10 years ago this guy replaced his hot water heater. In the middle of the night the wife said she smelled gas. Husband said he'll fix in the morning. House exploded and was leveled. Both lived. Crazy thing is 2 years later a house a few doors down also blew up due to gas. But in that case a guy was down on his luck and was stealing his neighbor's gas. His home was foreclosed and the bank was having it inspected. The guy unhooked the gas and the house blew up that night. Not clear if he did it intentionally or not. 41. Who TF says, don't worry, I'll fix the explosives building up in our house in like 8-9 hours tops. Sweet dreams. 42. I imagine that was the most epic "I told you so" of that marriage. 43. Maybe you could just barely hear the hiss of the gas. Some part of you was picking up on it but it wasn't audible enough to register consciously. Instead your brain decided to keep an ear on it by leaving the door open. 44. I love that our brains are like, hey, asshole, I'm trying to tell you something, and we're too dumb to figure it out right away. 45. I once was asked if I could give someone a ride home from a local convenience store. Normally I would say so, but I decided to be nice that day. They were a lady in their mid-30s or early 40s, so I figured it wasn't that big a deal. For whatever reason, I subconsciously mentioned that I wasn't able to buy what I went into the store for because I forgot my wallet at home. The person says, "You don't have your wallet on you?" I say, "Nah." They look a little concerned, and a few moments later say they can walk to their destination just fine. Thought it was weird but didn't think too hard about it. Next day it's on the news that an armed robbery took place in the exact location she asked me to take her to, and gave a description that 100% matched the person I was going to take home. Didn't really save myself as I had nothing to steal, but an interesting story. 46. You never know. They get spooked for some reason and you could have gotten shot. 47. May have saved yourself even. Or than you think if they had tried to rob you and didn't believe you when you said you didn't have your wallet. 48. Threw a flashlight in my pocket when going for a day hike. We got lost in mountain lion territory and took over an hour in the dark to get out once we found the trail again. And we could hear some animal near us the whole time hiking out in the dark. Scared the bejeepers out of me, but the flashlight made it infinitely better than it could have been. 49. I was scheduled for a mammography when I got 50. Somehow, it didn't work out that year, because the appointment was in Bavaria but I live in Dusseldorf. And I also thought it was not that important. But a year later, they sent me the invitation again. I scheduled a mammography in Bavaria then, as I was visiting my parents anyway, and I thought, well, they probably aren't going to find anything. But if I have cancer and didn't have that mammography, I'm going to regret it. I expected a letter telling me that they had found nothing. But in fact, they did find something that needed further investigation. Turned out to be slow-growing breast cancer. 1 year earlier, it would not have been there yet. And 1 year later, it would have been much larger and possibly needed chemo as well as the surgery. But as it was, they could just cut it out, and that was that. 50. Something similar happened to my mom, too. Her mammogram was postponed due to COVID back in 2020, and when she finally got around to getting it, they found something concerning. If she had gotten the mammogram when she was meant to, it wouldn't have been visible any later, and it would have been a problem. 51. Helped a victim of human trafficking get to a shelter. Context: I was a medical student at the time, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the ER who had a pretty bad injury to her face was with a sketchy-looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. I never talked to her myself, but I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. 52. I wish all healthcare workers received training on how to spot and help HD and DV victims. Thank you for being so aware. 53. We do. It doesn't mean that everyone is good at it or pays attention. In the ER we get extensive training, but I think upstairs only does yearly training. 54. I mean, to be fair, it's a stressful job. You won't see everything, you are human. 55. Every time I've checked into an ER or hospital for something, when they're completing the check-in questions, they always ask whether I'm being abused right in front of my husband. This husband is wonderful, but my ex was abusive. There would have been hell to pay once we got back home if I had ever said the truth about his abuse in front of him. Every single time, I point this out to the person asking, and every single one acts surprised, as though they'd never thought of that before. 56. I got life insurance on my husband during open enrollment, and we joked, haha, I'll be a rich widow, haha. Totally joking, because we have never had any policies on either of us. He got sick and passed away 2 months later. The money saved my butt, and I tell everyone to get life insurance. It's so very important. 57. I made my spouse get life insurance just in case, and the mandatory screening caught a serious illness before they ever showed noticeable symptoms. 58. What happens in that instance? They were denied for insurance because it was deemed pre-existing? I have knowledge about a lot of subjects. Life insurance isn't one of them at all. I know the difference between whole and partial. That's about it. I was denied when I applied because of pre-existing conditions. I can get burial insurance, so I self-funded. 100% of my burial etc. is covered. But that doesn't leave anything but assets to dependents. 59. It is up to the insurance company, and the laws in your state can also potentially affect how they make that decision. In the states where I am licensed, several in the Southeast, a provider will have something like graded and guaranteed if you don't qualify for first-day coverage due to an issue you already have. Those rates are often higher and could have some contingencies, such as being return of premium for the first 24 months. Certain issues can cause the insurance company to turn you down entirely, and they have that right, and for their business model it makes sense. If this happens, you can find a company that sells something called guaranteed issue. If you just look at the math and not the real-world application, GI is usually not a great deal, but that absolutely does not mean you shouldn't do it if you can't get approved any other way. The worst thing that can happen is that you might die during the waiting period, and your beneficiary will receive everything you have paid in plus interest. 60. I'm so sorry for your loss, but grateful the money was there to help you. It's nice to have that to take care of the logistics of a loved one passing and not add to the heartache you're already going through. 61. Was coming home from sledding when I was a wee 6 years old. Just me and my dad, in the old Ford Explorer. Before we left the park, we had an argument about wearing my seatbelt. I think it was because I was bundled up and chunky, and did not want the added sensory discomfort of being strapped into the passenger seat. Dad wins, I wear the seatbelt. He forgets to put his on. About a mile from our humble farmhouse. He's going decently slow because the roads are slick. We hit ice and spun out anyways. We run right into the tree line through a barbed wire fence, and smack into a tree head-on pretty hard. Because my dad was not wearing his seatbelt, he ended up on my side of the car, head smashed into the windshield, blood everywhere. Luckily, an older couple were driving down our relatively quiet country road and stopped to help. They drove my poor little traumatized self down the road to our house and took Dad to the ER. He was thankfully fine, just needed stitches, maybe a mild concussion. I think my dad still had glass coming out from his scalp like 5 years after that, though. Glad he was a persistent, good father and made me put my seatbelt on. 62. Closing the curtains. I'm sitting in my living room watching Frasier, and I can't explain it, but I get this overwhelming feeling to close the curtains. I'm thinking to myself I've lost it, and it's probably nothing. It nags me the rest of the episode, and so I close them. Turns out, there was a guy who would look into people's windows to see if they lived alone. He would then saw and rob them. He hit my next door neighbor at the time. 63. One night I was sound asleep and dreaming I was hanging out at a party or whatever, and suddenly all the people in the room turned to me and just urgently and repeatedly told me to close the blinds. I usually close them all as the sun goes down, but in my room, mine were open and my window was open a tiny bit. So I woke up and locked the window and closed the blinds. Same thing. Dude had been looking for women alone and ended up breaking into a house down the road from me. 64. Holy shit, that's scary. When I was in college, a payphone was across from my room at the end of the hall of our girls-only wing. It was expensive for a landline in your room, so a lot of us used the old payphone, including me and my roommate. We got really used to answering it at crazy hours and knocking on doors to announce our neighbors' calls. It was usually just moms and boyfriends. But my roommate was always on it, getting calls from her long-distance boy at crazy hours, and tying it up for the rest of us. One late night, there was a knock, and someone telling us there was a call for us, nothing unusual. I'd come home from a party and was well on my way into a heavy sleeping it off session, but as my roommate headed for the door to take the call from her boyfriend, I bolted straight upright like a cartoon character. "Don't open the door. Ask who the call is for," she asked, and got no response. I actually woke up fully to her demanding who it was for, asking for a name. We both waited for about 10 minutes to stick our heads out, and nobody was there. Reported it the next morning to the RAW, just to be on the safe side. About 2 days later, we heard that there was a sexual assault at another local campus by somebody who'd broken into the girls' dorm that night, and we weren't the only room on our campus who reported sketchy shit around the same time. The only thing we could figure out was different was it was really late and the voice was unfamiliar and male. And even through booze sleep, my lizard brain probably registered the fact that the phone never rang. 65. Man, I was about to go sleep. Lol, why did I read this? I'm glad you guys were okay though. 66. Not me but my parents. I was probably an early teen and my parents were leaving to go run an errand, but it was kind of early, about 8 or 9 a.m., so I didn't want to go and asked to stay home. My dad agreed and came to ask me again, and I said I wanted to stay. They ended up leaving but turned back around and my dad said they didn't want me staying home and I better just get up and go. After some whining I agreed to go. I think we were gone maybe 20 min when they got a call from the police that our alarm system went off and our house had been burglarized by 2 guys. The police was able to get one of them but the other one got away. Who knows in what situation I would have been in had I stayed home? 67. I for some reason had the feeling that I was being watched. So I closed all the blinds and just let the dog out the back door instead of walking him. My dog found the creep in my backyard and dragged him by the pant leg out of a bush, thrashing him around. Based on the video, the dog got at least 4 good bites in. 68. As a manager, I noticed my team was getting saddled with harder work than the other teams. I informed my boss, but she laughed at me and sent me packing. Since we tracked employee productivity by case worked, I had a feeling I'd need some kind of proof in the future, so I went back to my team, explained the situation and informed them I wanted them to keep daily logs of all of their cases and timestamp them, even though the system did this automatically. Fast forward 2 years. Another manager believes his employees are getting harder cases than the other teams, so he complains about it to his boss. His rapport with her is significant as he works the same shift, so she looks into it. After a 3-day secret investigation, I get one of the most aggressive and hateful emails of my career accusing me of cherry-picking millions of cases over years of work for my team. My response was to hand her daily logs from every employee for 2 years. 11,000 sheets of paper, give or take. The absolutely incredulous look she gave me was worth it alone. What's this? That's 100% accurate daily logs of every employee and their cases worked. Why do you have this? To protect them from you when you inevitably did this. Insert offended look here. This is ridiculous. There's no need for them to be wasting time keeping these logs. There wasn't until today. Feel free to check them. Oh, I will. 3 days later I got my apology. Turns out an employee was coming in early and scanning in my employee's paperwork and tossing their cover sheets, so there was no record they had done any of the difficult work. After running numbers, it was determined that the other manager was incorrect, and the evidence showed my team worked roughly 34% of difficult cases and accounted for 15% of the total workforce. The day shift employees all got into trouble for passing off hard cases. The day I got to tell my team their logs literally saved all of our jobs was one of my best days at work, ever. 69. My son had graduated college and then decided to follow his girlfriend to a small town where she got her dream job. It was a small town and good jobs were hard to come by, so almost a year went by with him only working part-time jobs. He had hit the age where we could not have him on our medical insurance anymore. I was concerned about this and started looking into options and told him to apply to our state's low-income medical. For once he listened, and I thank God every day, because not a month after being approved he started to have leg pain. The first 2 trips to the doctor, they wrote it off as a pulled muscle, but the third time they ordered tests to find out he had a blood clot that stretched from his lower calf up into his abdomen. Placed him right into the hospital, but remember, small town, did not have the expertise to take care of this 50-mile ambulance ride to bigger hospital, lots of tests to find out why, and a total of over $120,000 of charges when all was said and done, in which he had to pay less than $20. He is good now, but it did damage the vein in his leg and he had pain from it and will have to be on blood thinners the rest of his life. 70. Checked behind my car to find 3 bikes back here. I almost ran them over. 71. We were having our pipes replaced in the front yard. Before leaving for work, my boyfriend decided last minute to move his new truck out from under the carport and park it on the street. Later that day, the ditches were being filled in and the backhoe operator backed into the carport, causing the entire structure crash down off the house, right where the truck would have been. 72. Well, I took tomorrow off even though I arrived home from Europe today. Good thing I did, because it's 11 p.m. and I'm currently waiting to take off at Philadelphia and have been waiting for hours. Edit, scratch that. Apparently you can't wait over 3 hours to de-ice, so looks like I'm stuck in Philly. Edit, my pilots are determined to get to Indy, so they're going to try again. Edit, they did it. We're taking off. We're one of the very few planes actually leaving tonight. 73. Bottled water. I had mentioned to my mom that we should get a few bottles of water to keep just in case we needed it. About a week afterwards we had a nasty storm and they had to shut off our water for a few days. The supermarkets all nearby ran out of bottled water from people caught unprepared. 74. Get an old box or a backpack and fill it with an extra set of old clothes, including shoes, socks, shirt, pants, a simple first aid kit, a flashlight, some water and a roll of toilet paper. Put it in the trunk of your car. I guarantee that you will use it one day. If you want to be even smarter, add one of those shiny emergency blankets, a whistle, duct tape and multi-tool. It doesn't take up much space. I just recently used the pants, the socks, multi-tool and water at a tailgate party. The toilet paper was used several times through the years. I'm a hero for that one. You never know,